The tape ran out on a Tuesday. Kale noticed because the silence woke them. Not the silence of sleep. They hadn't slept in something approaching a normal schedule since the Vorhai arrived, but the silence of the little recorder on the bedside shelf, its plastic wheels, going still. The hiss of blank tape fading like the last breath of something that knew better than to stick around. They lay there a moment, staring at the ceiling of the processing unit. That was what the Vorhai called it. Processing unit. Like the word room was too generous, too human, too full of implication about choice and comfort and the right to leave. Kale reached for the recorder, pressed rewind. The tape clicked and spun, rewinding their own voice back to the beginning. That was the thing about dyschronometria, their dyschronotria specifically, which the Vorhai had catalogued in meticulous detail within 48 hours of intake. It made time feel like weather, sometimes slow and heavy and gray, pressing down. Times it simply vanished, hours gone like water into sand, and they'd surface somewhere they didn't remember moving to, something they didn't remember doing half-finished in their hands. The tapes were how they stayed anchored, their own voice narrating forward. You took your supplements at a 600. You passed the hallway checkpoint at a 714. You spoke to no one. Keep moving. You are doing fine. They were not doing fine. The facility called itself Fertile Crescent. Kale had seen the brochure, had read it 3 times in fact, because the first 2 times they couldn't be sure how much time had passed between paragraphs. Warm tones, soft language about optimization and legacy and the gift of biological continuity. The kind of language that sanitized itself so thoroughly it stopped meaning anything at all. They had found the brochure in their apartment mailbox, already addressed to them by name, 6 weeks before the Vorhai made official first contact with Earth's governments. Now lying in the processing unit, it occurred to Kale, not for the first time but with a new sharpness, that the brochure had arrived before the announcement. For anyone on Earth publicly knew the Vorhai existed. They pressed play. You have an appointment at 0900, the tape told them in their own voice. Consultation 7, do not be late. They will notice if you are late. Smile when you enter. You are allowed to be afraid. Do not show it. Kale sat up, rubbed their face. On the shelf above the recorder, arranged with the neat precision of people who wanted you to feel cared for, were 3 supplements in a paper cup and a glass of water. The Vorhai were very attentive about the supplements. The supplements were why they'd come. Not Kale. Kale hadn't come here willingly exactly, though the sequence of events that had brought them here had the neat, terrible logic of a trap designed by something patient. What Kale meant was, the Vorhai had come to Earth for the eggs, not Earth's resources, not Earth's territory, not even, it turned out, Earth's people in any general sense. They'd come for a very specific biological material produced by a very specific subset of human bodies. Material that in Vorhai biochemistry solved a problem that had been killing the civilization slowly for 300 years. A fertility crisis, an irony so large it had its own gravitational pull. The Vorhai did not reproduce the way humans did. Their young were grown, engineered, cultivated, and the mechanism by which they cultivated them had begun failing 2 centuries ago, degrading generation by generation like a photocopy of a photocopy. Their scientists had searched everywhere. They'd cataloged 10,000 species across 40 systems. Human genetic material, specifically human oocytes, mature egg cells, harvested under precise conditions, provided a kind of biological scaffolding their own cellular architecture could incorporate. Not to create hybrids, nothing so dramatic, just to stabilize what was failing, to give their lineages back their shape, so they'd come here. With their ships and their carefully worded treaties and their Fertile Crescent facilities on 6 continents, and they'd asked, politely, firmly, with the weight of something that could flatten cities behind every word, for volunteers. Kale had not volunteered. They took the supplements. The taste was wrong. It had always been wrong, a faint chemical undersharp beneath the sweetness, but they took them because the tape said to and because refusing was a conversation they didn't know how to navigate, without losing time, without surfacing somewhere worse. Consultation 7 was held in a room that was trying very hard to look like it wasn't what it was. Soft lighting, 2 chairs that faced each other at an angle suggesting conversation, not interrogation. A low table with a pitcher of water and a bowl of something that smelled like citrus. The Vorhai consultant was already seated when Kale arrived. They were always already seated. A small dominance ritual Kale had started timing once they recognized it, and it looked up with a particular arrangement of its facial structures that the Vorhai used to approximate welcome. Kale. It had learned their name quickly, they all had. You look rested. Thank you, Kale said. Sat down. Placed their hands on their knees the way the tape had coached them, a specific posture of calm that their body had started doing automatically. I've been thinking about the timeline. The consultant's secondary eyelids, the translucent ones, the ones it couldn't fully control, shifted. Team. Kale had been cataloging tells since week 2. They had a whole section of tape devoted to it. The timeline is proceeding as scheduled, it said. I know, Kale said. I want to know what happens after the harvest. There was a pause. Not a thinking pause, a calibrating pause, the kind that preceded a prepared answer. You'll be given a full recovery period. The transit integration support. We've discussed my friend, Kale said. Another pause. Longer. Her name was Diana. He'd been here when Kale arrived. Had been here longer, in fact, had come because she actually wanted to. Because she'd been trying for years, and the Vorai had offered her something in the fine print of their arrangement. Something about access to technologies that might help. She'd been the one who told Kale the supplements tasted wrong. He'd been the one who'd gone to ask about it 2 weeks ago, and then she simply hadn't come back. Diana is receiving specialized care, the consultant said. I'd like to see her. That won't be possible at this time. Kale nodded slowly. Here. On the inside of their wrist, hidden under the long sleeve of their standard issue garment, was a small piece of tape, actual adhesive tape. The kind used to hold bandages, stolen from the medical pit in the bathroom. On it, in their own handwriting, so small it looked like a pattern. D is leverage. You know what they want. Act accordingly. They'd written it during a bad stretch. A long zone out from which they'd emerged with a clarity they couldn't entirely trust but had decided to act on anyway. The principle of it. The Vorai wanted something specific from them. As long as they hadn't gotten it, Kale had something to bargain with. The moment they got it, Kale was just another discharge form. I'd like to propose a modification, Kale said. The consultant's secondary eyelids did the thing again. Eat. We don't typically. My agreement. They kept their voice level. The tape rewinding in their head. You are allowed to be afraid, do not show it. I've been reviewing it. I have a condition, a modification I mean, a request. What sort of request? I want access to the full facility, not just this wing. Team, I want to verify personally that Diana is receiving the care you're describing, that she can leave, that she chose to stay. Kale looked at the consultant directly, which the Vorai found mildly aggressive and which Kale had decided was a tool they could use carefully. If she's fine, if everything is fine, then I'll cooperate with the harvest without requiring any further documentation. You'll have what you came for. A long silence. The processing unit that night had a different quality of quiet. Val sat on the edge of the bed with the recorder in their lap and recorded for a long time, not instructions for tomorrow's self, but a kind of accounting. What they knew, what they guessed, what they felt, the fear which was enormous. The love for a body they'd spent years learning to understand on their own terms, which the Vorai had catalogued and valued for entirely different reasons and which Kale had decided, somewhere, between consultation 5 and the moment they noticed Diana was gone, was not something they were going to let be stripped away in increments until there was nothing left. They were not their eggs. The Vorai could not seem to conceptualize this. It wasn't cruelty exactly. Kale had spent enough time observing them to believe that. It was more like a structural inability. The body as a resource allocation problem. They saw Kale as a body. The gap between those two views of the same person was where everything terrible lived. Till tomorrow they'd been told they'd get their access, a supervised tour, a chance to see Diana. Kale recorded a note about that too, the specific phrasing of the offer, the name of the consultant who'd agreed, the time. They were meticulous about time when they could hold on to it. Diana was in a room 3 corridors away that was not called a room. He looked up when Kale came in, the supervisor hanging back at the threshold the way the Vorai supervisors always did, maintaining the theater of privacy. Her face did something complicated. He opened her mouth. I'm fine, she said quickly, in the voice of someone saying words they'd rehearsed. Okay, Kale said. They crossed the room, sat in the chair beside her, took her hand. The supervisor shifted but didn't intervene. Physical comfort being one of the behaviors the Vorai had classified as non-threatening, which Kale had noted, and held it. I believe you, they said clearly, for the room, for whatever was listening then, so quietly that the words barely had shape. Blink twice if you want out. Diana looked at them. Blinked twice. The plan was not elegant. It was not clever in the way that plans in stories are clever. It was the kind of plan you make when you are a person with a condition that makes time unreliable. Operating on 40% sleep in a facility designed by beings who do not understand that humans, are not just their most useful components. It was held together by tape, literally in some places Kale's own handwriting on adhesive strips placed on the inside of their sleeve, the inside of their wrist, the edge of a supplement cup, pressed flat. Remember, you are doing this. The Vorai had optimized for compliance. They had not optimized for someone who had spent years developing external memory systems, or someone whose entire survival strategy was documentation. They'd assessed Kale's condition as a liability, and not looked further. They had not seen that the tapes were also a map. Kale had been recording since intake. Every corridor, every shift change noted by the sound of footsteps and the pattern of door tones. Every blind spot in the supervision schedule, which existed because the Vorai were methodical in ways that assumed methodical opposition, and Kale's opposition was not methodical. It was incremental, granular, built up across 7 consultations and approximately 200 small acts of sustained attention. The exit they used was not an exit. It was a maintenance access point that one of Kale's tapes described in their own voice. Third corridor from the East Processing Wing, panel marked with 2 vertical lines, requires a tool or a firm. That lateral pressure at the lower left corner, discovered during zone out on day 11. Present self does not remember it directly, but past self left you this. The supervisor had been managed. Thought neutralized. Kale hadn't hurt anyone, wasn't going to, but delayed, routed. A misunderstanding about Consultation 8. A scheduling conflict Kale had manufactured across 2 separate documented interactions in ways that only cohered if you had the tapes, which the supervisor did not. Diana moved slower than Kale had accounted for. They adjusted. The tape in their head said, adjust. This is what humans do. You are not the plan. You are the person executing the plan, and people can adapt and plans cannot. The outside air, when they hit it, was cold and smelled like industrial runoff and something green underneath it. Some weed or vine forcing itself through the concrete margins of the facility's outer wall. Kale stood in it for a moment, just a moment. Then they pressed record. We are outside, their voice said into the tape. We are okay. Diana is here. We are moving. Note the time. It is. They looked up. The sky was still dark but shifting, the particular blue-gray of early morning that precedes light. They couldn't tell the exact time. They didn't need to. What they knew, they were outside. What they knew, Diana was beside them, breathing hard, her hand still in theirs. What they knew, the Vorai would discover the discrepancy within the hour, and the supervised tour would escalate into something else, and the official channels and the treaties and the carefully worded agreements about cooperation would become suddenly semi-relevant. What they knew, they were not the only ones. Because Kale had been watching, and recording, and adding it all up. The facility had intake forms going back months before contact. The brochure had known their name before any public announcement. The supplements tasted wrong, and the compounds in them weren't all labeled, and some of what Kale had been able to identify through a pharmacist friend. Contacted through a supervised communication panel, in a conversation whose subtext would have required 7 tapes to reconstruct, were not recovery supplements, were preparation compounds, preconditioning. They were not the only ones who'd noticed. The tape Kale had pressed into Diana's hand during that moment of physical comfort in the supervised room, because they'd prepared it, because past self was careful in ways present self couldn't always be, contained a frequency, a signal, a contact, other people, other facilities, other humans who'd started paying attention and documenting and building their own versions of the map. Humans were, it turned out, very good at surviving by talking to each other. The Vorai had catalogued the condition. They had not catalogued what the condition had taught its host. Kale hit stop. Then play. Their own voice came back at them, steadying as a hand on the shoulder. You did this, all of it. You held the time when it tried to leave, and you used what you had, and you did not let them tell you what you were worth or what you were for. And then quieter, almost amused. You were afraid the whole time. That's fine. Fear is human. So is this. They walked Diana beside them, the sky brightening. In the 6 Fertile Crescent facilities on 6 continents, 7 other humans were in the middle of their own variations of this story. Quieter, some of them, louder, one of them. All different. All the same shape, person who had noticed something, documented something, held on to something the Vorai had not realized had value. The Vorai were 300 years into a civilizational crisis. They were brilliant and methodical and patient in ways that made human patience look like impatience. They had not been prepared for humans who had decided very quietly and with great personal cost to pay attention. Kale pressed record again. Note for whoever finds this tape, they said. Or whoever is listening, because someone is going to find this eventually and they should know. They wanted us for what our bodies could do for them. They did not ask who we were first. They should have asked. You learn a lot about a person when you ask who they are. You learn what they'll do. A pause, wind in the microphone. Diana's breathing beside them, slower now, more even. We're coming home. We took the long way. We have names and we have a lot of tapes, and we are very tired and we are fine. Click. The recorder went still. They kept walking.